you define it? Can you help us define federalism?
Well, it's a funny thing to define federalism because it is something that defines the constitutional system, and yet people disagree as to whether it is a practical policy or an underlying principle. What is clear is that when we first formed the union that became the United States, it was based on state sovereignty. In fact, Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation made very clear that the states would be true sovereigns. That obviously proved to be something of a disaster as states exercised powers that are usually associated with nations. So that had to be changed, and what changed is that the states were no longer considered sovereigns in the technical sense. But you did have the reaffirmation that we had a limited government, and by limited it meant that the power would rest in the people and secondarily in the states.
A hard and fast definition of federalism would be something like the in-between between a unitary or national system on the one hand and a confederal system on the other. In the American system, essentially what it means is a division of power that the people have given two different levels of government.
It's a great question to ask, what do we mean when we talk about a federal system? I think the key thing here is to recognize that federal systems in many ways destroy the whole concept of sovereignty. We hold on to the word. The word has a kind of hallowed history of its own. We like to talk about sovereignty. We like to say that the states are sovereign and the national government is sovereign. But I think the reality is federalism, particularly American federalism, really messes that up. It takes a bunch of particular powers, each of which could be characterized as an aspect of sovereignty, and it divides them or it allocates them to different levels of government. So the original concept of sovereignty, that there should be some absolute, final, ultimate, irresistible source of authority within a state, that really disappears in lots of ways. And to make sense of how a federal system operates, you have to start by looking very specifically at what the division of powers is.
Madison talked in the Federalist Papers about there being a double security to the rights of the people, because we're dividing powers between the national government and the states, and we're dividing powers among the federal government between the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And if you look even closer at that, you can see federalism within, not only among, these various parts of the Constitution.
Usually what a constitution does is it determines which power is sovereign in a country. And so in a unitary state, the sovereign government, the one that has ultimate authority, is the national government. In a confederation, the sovereign governments are the governments of the component unit states, or whatever they're called. In a federal system, there's no one single government that is sovereign over all things. There's a division of labor, a division of responsibility. And in that sense, the people are sovereign. They decide where they want to distribute the power between the federal government or national government and the state or component units.
The basic meaning of federalism is the constitutional division of authority between the state and federal governments, and more particularly, the American system of federalism is quite unusual in the world in that it involves a counterintuitive idea that both the states and the national government have a kind of sovereign power, or a limited kind of sovereign power. The idea of limited sovereign power is itself unusual. To divide up sovereign power between two governments is doubly unusual. If you look at the ideas of sovereignty throughout history. But the American idea of federalism is basically there's one ultimate sovereign, that's the people. The people delegate their partial part of their sovereignty to two governments, the federal government, the national government, and the state governments. The purpose of this system, the overall purpose of this complex division of authority, is to set up a political competition between the two levels of government for a number of reasons, but the basic reason is to try to keep each government within its assigned roles through political competition.
Federalism means that there's some range of activities over which states are actually autonomous, and the federal government cannot tell them what to do. So the be-all and end-all of American federalism in that sense is the rule that the federal government may not commandeer state officials and tell them to do anything at all. It can incentivize them to do it by giving them money, or it can say, look, we'll give you a choice between either regulating on your own or we will do it for you, but it can never step in and say, you must now do this.
It was, in fact, the Constitution that reaffirmed that the power would rest with the people. And I think that people misunderstand that. Many academics misunderstand it. Some say, well, you know, the change from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution meant that there was an abandonment of state sovereignty. I don't believe that's true. And many others will argue that the fact that people like James Madison referred to power resting with the people meant it didn't rest with the state. That is also, in my view, untrue. I think where the truth is found is that the Constitution views the state as the vehicle of the power exercised by the public. It is where the public expresses its views and also corrects the powers of the government. Rights are most protected, they're most safe when they're held closest. And by that it means they're held by the states. People have much more direct involvement in their state governments than they do in the federal government.